All right. Here we are. We are live. Let me just make sure that everything's working properly here before we dive right into it. So it's a little bit of a lag between what I'm seeing and when you're seeing it. So I just want to make sure that this is all working the way that it's supposed to. All right, and there I am. Okay, so it looks like things are working as they should, which is always a relief with live streams. Okay, so without further ado, I'm Dan Pierce, back again. It's been a few weeks. I am the director of the Heartwood documentary and host of the Heartwood Stream Series. And yeah, I've been off for a couple weeks, and but with good reason. In October, I went away for 10 days, and using the funds that I raised through the GoFundMe crowdfunding campaign funded by maybe some of you who are watching right now. And if so, I'm very grateful you're making this all happen. But I was able to use those funds that I raised over the summer and take a trip out to the interior and stop at a bunch of places along the way. My first destination was Grand Forks, BC, where I did a bunch of filming in the watersheds around Grand Forks and tried to capture the story of the flooding that's been happening in the city of Grand Forks for 3 out of the past 4 years. So that was really powerful, getting those human stories of people who are directly impacted by the logging in the watersheds coming down, and there being literal downstream consequences for people on the ground. And we got out into the watershed with some local veteran loggers. They would call themselves old-timer loggers, and did a bunch of filming out in the watershed, driving around bumpy logging roads and flying the drone around, getting some of the most stunning and devastating aerials that I've captured for this project to date. So that means, seeing some of the biggest clear cuts that I've ever seen, seeing some of the biggest landslides that I've ever seen. And yeah, so that's definitely, it hurts to see that, but also, that's what's happening. And so it feels good to be capturing that and bringing those images to you. And that's just a little taste of what we did. I also went all the way out to the Slocan Valley and did a bunch of filming up north of Revelstoke with Craig Pettit from the Valhalla Wilderness Society, and he took me out. I posted some photos to my page last week of recent old growth logging in critical caribou habitat, and that was really, really tough to see, when caribou are, facing more and more dire circumstances, and that kind of old growth logging is still happening in their habitat. So lots more about that to come. I also then stopped in Peachland on my way back home and did a bunch of filming in Peachland. Also getting out into the watershed and filming watershed issues. Also, actually, while I was in the Slocan Valley, did a bunch of filming with Herb Hammond and got, more than just the doom and gloom. Herb was able to bring a more positive vision of ecosystem-based conservation planning, and I'm really excited to share all that stuff with you. And we went out and visited, a selective harvest operation by SIFCO, the Slocan Integral Forestry Cooperative. And they actually did some really nice work in this cut block that Herb showed me, and it was, it was naturally regenerating. The light touch machinery that they used hadn't damaged the soil. There was lots of new growth coming back, and of course they left lots of great trees behind. So that's always good to see. Love to see it. And I'm going to be sharing a lot of that with you over the next little while. Since I got back, I've been digging into all my footage, which of course takes a lot of time. And, I've been making documentaries, like environmental type documentaries. I've been working on this project for 8 years. And it was always with a vision that somewhere down the line, I'd make some, big documentary, whether it was a feature or whether it was you know, a short web documentary, but it would be something that's highly produced. And of course, I've done a bunch of that stuff. But what ends up happening is that when I do those highly produced documentaries that's drawing from days and days of footage and hours and hours and hours of footage, you never really get to see all the footage, you know? Like, you get to see those little nuggets of gold, and it's all whittled down, and it's chopped up, and it's overlaid with B-roll and aerials and music, and you never really get to see, you know, peek behind the curtain of all those great stuff, all the great stuff that I've been able to capture along the way. And so this show, this stream series, is sort of like giving me a new outlet for how I can now maybe start to use my footage and share it, and open the door and let you, or pull back the curtain behind the documentary process and let you actually see a bunch of the, you know, raw footage that I have. And it's not fully raw, I've edited it somewhat, but but the idea here is that it's minimal editing. You're seeing it in a more rough form. You're seeing, you know, more of the footage that I've got, and I've overlaid it with some of the best, you know, most stunning aerials that I've got as well. And so that's the idea here today. Is this is going to be a bit of a different format. This isn't going to be your typical two talking heads on the screen Zoom interview that I've been doing with this show before. Today, what we're going to do is I am going to show you a bunch of extended clips or extended segments of my documentary footage that I shot on this recent trip from one day, just one of the days of filming. I've basically gone in and I've pulled a bunch of selects. I've strung them together in a row. It's going to be jump cut, you know, it's going to be pretty roughly edited. There's no color correction. There's no music. It's, you know, this is basically, I'm giving you a chance to look at the footage, you know, while we're very early on in the process. That being said, you know, the footage that I'm about to show you is great. And the gentleman who was my guide on this particular day, Stan Swinarchuk, is what he would call himself, an old-time logger who lives in Grand Forks and who has logged in the Boundary watershed around Grand Forks since the 1960s, since he was 12 years old. Imagine being 12 years old and working out in the bush. He started off as a chokerman and gradually worked his way up to a faller, and was a faller in the Boundary watershed for decades. And now in, you know, more recent years, and actually, as you know, in his earlier years as well, he talks about how, you know, he started to witness the changes happening in the forest industry, going from more selective harvesting to the more and more mechanized, large-scale clear cutting that we see today with feller bunchers and just the vast volumes that are getting logged today. And it started to scare him, right? And but I don't want to speak for Stan too much. Stan is going to tell you all about that through a number of segments that I'm going to show you today. I think, you know, it all adds up to about an hour, but I've broken it down into 4 separate segments. Clip 1 is just basically us driving out to the watershed, and Stan's in the truck and I'm filming in the passenger seat. And Stan, basically gets into a little bit of his background and his story as we're getting out to the location. So the first segment that I'm about to show you, it's about 20 minutes long. We're just driving. This is just driving in a truck with Stan Swinarchuk, and Stan sharing a little bit of his story. And, I'm going to actually stick with you here while we do this. I'm going to sort of like put my face in the lower corner like that. And when I switch it over, I'll kind of still be here with you. I might chime in from time to time, but we'll mostly let Stan do the talking. I also cut my own voice out of this because I wasn't mic'd. So we're just going to focus on Stan here and his story. Once again, we're going out into the Boundary watershed, and Stan's going to show us, you know, some of some of the biggest clear cuts I've ever seen and some of the worst landslides that I've ever seen. And a lot of this can be traced to logging, and we'll talk about that more as this goes along. But I think that's enough for now, and I'm gonna go to clip number 1 here, and this is Stan and me just driving out into the Boundary watershed, and Stan's gonna tell a little bit of his story.
I'm taking us to Boundary Creek, which is just shy of Greenwood, and to show you some large clear cuts and a couple of landslides that we had here in the past couple of years. And hopefully we can see some wildlife. I haven't seen any for a few days. I've been up every day and haven't seen a doggone thing, not even a chicken. Chicken, well, what do I mean by chicken? It's a grouse. We call them chickens. That's where we're going today. It's not called a river, it's called Boundary Creek, but it's one of the bigger streams, one of the 5 that we have in, one of the 5 major ones that we have in the Boundary Country, in our watershed, the Kettle River watershed, yeah. So we got the West Kettle, we got Boundary Creek, we got the main Kettle, we got the Granby, and we got the Burrell. Those are the 5 main water sources in this, and they all dump into the Kettle River. And the biggest one, the Granby, dumps into the Kettle River right at Grand Forks. That's why they call it the Grand Forks, because they meet right at the town center. This watershed, since 1960, that's when I moved to Grand Forks, this watershed has been actually acting normal till about 2004, 2005. It started separating itself. The main rivers, the Kettle, the Granby, and all of the 5 of them started to scour the banks for some reason. And that's probably due to clear-cut logging. There's no retention in clear-cut logging, and it takes about 45 years to get a tree big enough to have retention in this boundary country. And the logging end of it, and I'm a logger. I mean, I raised a family, 3 kids, and a home and everything else. But you know, when I started back in, that's the first time I logged was back in 1960 during summer holidays out of school, and I went into the forest, and I was a chokeman behind a D5, D6 cat, and these guys were old timers, and it was just now that I look back, I thought they were a bunch of, but these guys were good. They were teaching me how to stay alive in the forest, and they were teaching me the right way to do and look after the forest. You know, I'd hook up a choker on the wrong side of another little tree that's about 5-6 inches, and the old cat driver, old George Voigt, would say, "Hey Stan, what the hell are you doing?" I said, "What, George?" I'm a kid, right? 12 years old, 13, just turned 13. He says, "I told you if I'm gonna pull that log that you hooked, I'm gonna knock that little sapling down. We have to save those trees. They're the next generation. And I said, oh yeah, right, George, I forgot. I remember now, sorry. You know, and they taught you stuff like that, taught you where to and how to do it in the forest. And we were selective logging back then. And yeah, these guys were great. We sat around at coffee time and lunchtime, and they tell you stories. I was all eyeballs and ears listening to those guys. Anyway, so that's what I was taught when I was young. And then I became a faller in the mid 60s, and I started falling when I was about 15. And they taught me how to fall and how to stay alive in the forest. You know, you got to keep your head up. You got to look. When you cut this tree down, you're looking at the other ones in front of you and behind you to stay alive. Anyway, the trees that I would fall were selective back in the 60s. And you couldn't fall anything under, I think it was 12 inch, or some of them, on some species it was 16 inch. You had to, anything above that you could fall, right? But anything below that you couldn't, because they're looking for retention, especially in the fir and the spruce and the cedar. Anything that's 12, 14 inches is still got retention. Anyway, I'd go back hunting in some of those areas that I cut because I knew there was a lot of deer there, and I'd go back, and you would never know that somebody was in there with machines and power saws and cut that thing after about 2 years, 3 years. It would fill right in, because what happens is, when you cut the big ones down, now the younger ones have a chance to get some sunshine, and the big ones aren't eating the water anymore, and they got more water, and they just shoot right up. They'll grow 4 or 5 feet a year when you give them the chance. Anyway, that started to change when they, it's a two-tier thing. It started to change when the bunchers came in, and the bunchers came in roughly in the mid to late 70s, but they were really primitive at that time. And also what came in at the same time, the sawmills were modernizing, and the technology was giving them a chance to be able to cut more and more and more and more, right? In the sawmill, so they want more trees. They'll make more money, and hence, by the time the 80s came up, they spruced up the bunchers to the point where they could cut without shattering the butt log, and then they took off from there, and I worked about 2010, but with guys that needed hand fallers. I did go on a buncher for a week or two, and that wasn't for me. Anyway, so by the time the mid 80s come, they were just wild open, eh? And it was scary to me anyway. It was scary watching these bunchers. What would take me 2 months or a month to fall, they'd fall it in a week and bunch it up yet too. And then they got grapple skidders, and the technology went so fast and so good that it's impacting our forest, because the forest does not know technology, and it does not work on technology. It works on the ecosystem, and hence when you start putting technology into the forest, all you're doing is just killing the ecosystem. And hence, today, we have islands in the rivers that we never used to have before. Islands in the never mind the Granby or the Kettle, the major ones. There's islands in the creeks like Boundary Creek, like Burl Creek. Islands. Like, they're scouring so bad that they're making gravel islands all over the place. We're turning off onto Boundary Creek here. So here we are, 0 kilometer on the Boundary Creek. This creek, this road on this creek is paved to roughly about 9-10 kilometer. And then it's gravel road after that. Well, you know, they're in danger now. All the loggers and the sawmills are all in danger, and so they're trying to get as much as they can as soon as they can. And and now it's a race to see which company is going to cut the last tree. It's a race. The way they're logging, they're bringing in trucks from all over the province in here, from Chetwynd, from Alberta, from everywhere. Prince George are coming down because we have a few trees left. And it's scary. The problem is everybody needs a job, and I understand that, but everybody needs water to live, and if you keep taking water or trees away, the water is going to diminish. And when the water diminishes, the trees are going to diminish. So it's a snowball effect that's going to happen in this watershed. We're probably already 50% clear cut in this watershed, and it's 10,000 square kilometers of watershed that we have in this boundary country, and half of it's already gone. So when you get to that point, things start happening, and that's what's happening. The floods, the fires, the erosion, it's all happening in a major part due to the greed factor, right? We all want to make money, more money, more money, more money. We all want to have more toys, and so you need more money. And when that kind of a mindset gets in, it's hard to stop.
That is segment 1, and but we got lots more to go, so stay with us. We're not going anywhere, but that's sort of the first segment. That was just us driving out to the location, and now we are about to arrive at our first filming location, and this is where things start to get really interesting. But if you stay with me for this whole thing, you'll notice that there's a clear escalation to what we're about to see. So yeah, buckle up. So this first location, this is actually an area that Stan, you know, selectively logged when he was a young kid getting started in the forest industry. And so we start once again back in the car, but we're gonna get out of the truck pretty quick here, and we're gonna see our first sample of logging devastation, or I wouldn't even call it logging devastation, just some straight up devastation. So here we go.
This is called the Old Camp Road. I logged up here in the 60s with Zibin Contracting, the fella that I was living with, and some of the stuff that we logged back then is looking pretty good. Now, I can't remember if it's exactly in this spot, but these trees are looking pretty good. I'll look into the forest to see if I can, oh yeah. Yeah, this was logged before, eh? And then selectively, right here. This was logged before, and now it's looking pretty good.
Yeah, because you still got a diversity of ages, right?
Absolutely.
Those trees that you left are now pretty old and big.
Yeah.
And then you've also got all the young stuff that's grown up since then. So it's still a healthy forest.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the way you got to do it, but you can't do it with bunchers, because the buncher can't turn his ass around anywhere in these unless he clear cuts it, eh? So that's the biggest problem. And technology. I mean, you people have technology. You can board feet in a 10-hour shift. Surely you can build a machine that can go in there and selectively cut these patches and leave the young ones, because you know the young ones already got 20, 30, 40-year growth, and you go in and chop them down. That's insanity, bordering on the verge of insanity. Anyway.
So hold on a second before you get out. So what are you about to show me right here?
I'm going to show you a slide on the old camp road where I used to log here in the early 60s. Like I say, we're on the old camp road, and happens to be that we had a massive slide here in 2018, and just showing you that fact.
Sure, why don't you show it when we walk over?
Okay. So you can see the slide here. That bright part is the bedrock up there, and that's where the water came down from that culvert up there. That was underneath the road, the logging road there, and it got so wet that it brought the whole, this was a forest right here, and it brought it all down and sent it over top of the bank. The mud was this high, and here's the mud in the bark, right here. That's how high it was when it came down. It's all up here. You see right here. That's the mud that came down across the road and into these trees, to the point where it debarked this one. The bark is all gone on here. And it went down there probably 200 meters further down. It filtered in through the trees. Well, I need a stick. To show you where that mud was. Oop. That mud was right there. See the mud?
I just got to pause it right here and just emphasize what we're looking at right now. You know, just look at how high off the ground that mud line was. You know, that should give you a sense of just how much water and gravel and boulders and debris came pouring down off this mountain. And you know, when I keep the video going here in a second, you'll just see how high this is and the kind of damage that it did. And we'll get a few more aerials here as well.
Right here. You can see the dirt coming down.
That's crazy. You know, like I don't know how high that is. Is that 12, 15 feet off the ground at that point? Like, crazy. Like, I can't imagine what that would have been like. Like, just the sound, the thunderous sound of all of this water and debris and material just pouring down off the hill. That's just bonkers.
Crazy. Yes, and it took a little bark off here. That one there got really debarked. I've been.
It took the bark right off the trees. Like, that's what we're talking about here. Like, just like that would have been an absolute catastrophe. Like, I would not have wanted to be standing there when that happened. And Stan will talk a little bit more about what he thinks happened there.
There 3 or 4 times and checked, and I'm thinking it's the placement of the culvert underneath the logging road that diverted the water to a place where it was never been before. And hence, on top of that bedrock where the trees were, and it just broke loose on 2018.
So what he's saying here is that there's a logging road up here somewhere, and what he suspects is that a culvert, was installed under the logging road that was, either insufficient for the job, or got backed up and wasn't maintained, or was sending water where it wasn't, historically hadn't gone and couldn't handle, and at some point the logging road washed out. And I'll jump back to the spot in a second, but basically, created this entire trail of destruction here that you can see goes right down to the bedrock. And, he'll talk about this a little bit more, but basically nothing will grow there for thousands of years, in that spot.
Nowadays, they got young people that go through techie school and really don't know the forest, the land. You've never been here. You come out of a city, out of Kamloops, out of Kelowna, out of Vancouver, Victoria, and you guys think you know everything, but they don't teach you everything out there. You got to have feet on the ground, and you got to learn from, like I did, from some old timers that can tell you something that you have to do in order to preserve this forest that we have. But they don't have that kind of common sense nowadays. So, and over here, I just take a picture of the trees that blew down.
This will take a minute to acknowledge that little burn there. They just don't have that common sense these days. Nice.
It's only some of them. A bunch of them down below there, they've been cutting on too, eh? So all these trees, beautiful trees, fir, larch.
A little shaky, but
they
we're
all
walking through a forest
blew down in that slide. And this is the smaller one. Well, I got a bigger one to show you.
Just wait.
in a bit.
He's not kidding. We're gonna see an even bigger one of these, so stay tuned. It gets worse, believe it or not.
This is the erosion from the slide.
This is crazy.
Just to give you an example how now all this stuff, all this erosion here is now working into Boundary Creek, and hence then it's going to work into the kettle, and that's why we got boulders and rocks and silt and sand going into our main watersheds.
It's deeper than he is tall. I mean, this is how much material got scoured out of the ground, knocking entire trees over. And as he says, it's all now going into the Kettle River, into the water system. Those are fish-bearing streams, so that's got to have an effect on the fish.
All the RPFs that supposed to be able to do the right thing are sitting in the office playing solitaire on the computer. They don't, and they're in essence they're scared to come out and see the destruction because they might feel guilty. They're afraid of that. You can't get an RPF to come out here. You look at some of these trees; they're dying now. Look at that. The fir, that one. They're dying. I don't know why they'd be dying. Well, I guess because of trauma. And this one's already got sponges and stuff and conchs, rotting stuff.
Okay, so in case you missed that, he's saying that these trees that are left that had their bark scoured off are dying now. You know, you look up, you can see they're not healthy. You can see they're losing needles. You can see they're dying. And, you know, apparently trees don't like it when they have all the bark ripped off of them. So that's news. You can see it's, you know, fungus is getting in. And yeah, these trees that, you know, didn't get knocked over, you know, probably aren't going to last much longer.
That's what that is, see? Huh. And nobody ever said anything. Nobody heard anything, you know. And I come up here one day just to have a look because I saw it from where we got off the pavement on the boundary creek. I saw this opening. I thought, oh shit, there must be logging up there. And then I put my binoculars on there. Geez, they log right down to bedrock here. That looks weird. So I came up here. Yeah, here it is, a massive slide. And that was in 2018.
So well, just to say that one more time, this was 2018. So this was the same year as the really bad flood in Grand Forks, where our very first ever guest on the Heartwood Stream Series, Jennifer Houghton, you know, where she talked about getting 4 feet of water in her house when the Kettle River flooded its banks. And so this happened that exact same year. You know, it might have happened in that same flood event. It's hard to say, you know. And someone asked in the comments, I wonder if anyone was ever held accountable for the damage. I'm going to have to look into that. My guess is probably not. You know, my guess is, you know, any of the operators in this area would probably just deny culpability. You know, they would say, oh, well, we didn't make that culvert, or, you know, this was an act of God. It was an extreme weather event. Who could have predicted it? You know, so, I mean, I got to dig into this, and I intend to find out whatever became of this. Was anyone penalized, and why don't we know about that? You know, it's definitely worth looking into. But if I had to bet, I would say probably not, because it's hard to tie any one particular event like this to any one particular, you know, mistake from one particular company, right? So anyway, and, you know, of course, they can always point to the big weather event and just say, oh, it was an act of God, you know. So that's my guess, but I will be looking into it.
Wow. Wow, this is the largest one I've ever seen until I went up to west boundary. Then I saw a lot bigger one. Anyway, yeah, no, I thought, holy, just let loose, I guess. And then I'm thinking, well, why would it let loose? You know, and so I took a drive up there, and I kind of figured out where that culvert is and where the water was flowing, and it was just over the bank, and hence it saturated the ground over at that bedrock, and it just turned loose, you know, because they pointed too much water in an area where it couldn't handle it, right? You know, the problem is these guys aren't putting culverts big enough for what they're logging, right? Because they're trying to cheap out. Wow, they're going to cost me how much? I'll just put a 2-footer. You need a 4-footer, or they'll say I don't need a 4-footer here, you know. And hence you log it up in behind there, and all of a sudden that 2-footer didn't do the job. And hence you got another blowout, and hence you got more silt and sand and gravel going into the river and making islands, and no room for the freshet water to go. And I can't believe that there's no restoration of anything going on. Nobody's doing anything about, oh, it was not our fault. We didn't put the culvert there, eh? I don't know. But look at that trench. I mean, and now it's funneling water down there, right? Now it's going to keep scouring some more in the new years and the new freshets. It's going to keep scouring forever and a day. Yeah. The sad part about this slide is that there was young trees there, just like these ones over here, these fir, that already had 20, 25, 30 years of growth. Now they're gone, right? Along with the old ones, eh? So that's the damage that is created. And now that you got basic bedrock, I mean, the soil has all gone down across the road. And now you got no soil, so nothing's going to grow there. It's crazy. It's out of control, totally out of control. And they know it, and the shareholders don't give a shit. And that's what's happening.
Okay, that's segment number 2 of 4 there, and that was our first filming location. But that was just our first stop. I got another segment for you here. This is gonna be a slightly different stop, where we're gonna be taking a look at, honestly, one of the biggest clear cuts I've ever seen. And when we were on the ground, you don't even really get a sense of how big it is while you're on the ground. But when I put the drone in the air, that's when you really start to see, the size and the scale. I can see there's 2 of me right now. Yeah, that's when you really start to see the size and the scale. And this was supposed pine beetle salvage, but as you'll hear Stan talk about, it wasn't just pine. There was dead pine there, but as long as they had sort of a percentage of dead pine, they were able to just go in and, without any sort of limits on clear cut size, just nuke the whole area, including all of the non-pine species, which were still healthy. The fir, the larch, all these other species that weren't affected by the pine beetle. But of course, the industry took all of it because that's all they know how to do anymore. All right, so anyway, I'm going to go to that now. This is our next stop on our journey through the Boundary Watershed. If you've just joined us recently, Mark Worthing saying he sees slides like that almost every time he goes out into the woods on northern Vancouver Island. Yeah, I mean, that's brutal. I don't think I've covered as much ground as Mark has, and so that was kind of a first for me, seeing a big slide like that. Yeah, that was brutal. So I'm gonna go to my next one here. This was one of the biggest clear cuts that I'd ever seen. It's from 2010, so it's greened up a little bit, but it basically, there's not much that's really come back. It's not doing its job as a forest, and of course there's no retention, as Stan will talk about.
We're looking at a severe cut block. This is one of the largest blocks that I have seen in this watershed. This block is roughly 1,200 and some odd hectares due to the jack pine situation. But what you have here now is no retention for anything. And hence you're going to get lots of floods and lots of silt and gravel and sand in the watersheds. In the main creek, like this main creek down here is the Boundary Creek, sorry. And it's already been inundated with clear-cut logging. And as you can see, across the valley there.
I just want to jump in here and say that this shot here, I basically had to up the settings on my drone and fly it a kilometer away. And when it reached its limit at a kilometer away from where we started, like, it still could not fit the edges of the clear cut in. And as I fade to this next shot here, imagine that I've panned over to the right. And like, look, this is just literally right beside where this last shot is looking. There's this narrow stretch of trees on the left here that, you know, is sort of separating this area, but this clear cut just continues right on over
West
to the
slope,
other side.
it's all been logged. There are a few little patches there that are, the darker patches are the old wood. Anything that you see that's light green is all regen with no retention. Regen does not have retention until it has 40 years, 45 years of growth.
And hold on a second here, like, just go back to this pan. Look across the valley. Like, okay, so it's all in the foreground, but it's all the way across the valley as well. Like that whole, all the slopes all the way along. It's just a checkerboard. There's little bits at the top. You can see some has grown back, but, you know, just staggering amount of timber just taken from this watershed. And I just don't know how you can deny that that has to have an impact on the water flows. Come on.
This was logged, almost 10 years ago, and I don't see any seedlings. Oh, but I can see them. They're roughly about 8 inches tall, maybe 10 inches tall. I couldn't believe it. I took pictures of that when I first got here. Couldn't believe it. Look at this. Look at this.
I got to get my hands on those pictures. I want to see what this looked like when it was brand new.
Like some of my logging friends were telling me, Stan, have you been up Dry Creek? I didn't know. What's up Dry Creek? You should go and see the devastation there. Of course, it looked a lot worse than it does right now because you got little willows and alders starting to come up that is covering the devastation. But back then it was devastating, you know, like, wow. This is one of the largest ones, I think, in this watershed. Not sure. I know they've got other ones that are 5 kilometers long, so I don't know, and how wide. I don't know how long wide they are, but I don't think it'll touch these. At the end of those standing trees over there is some more, right? And if I can stand over here, I can show you some more. Along that ridge that's coming down with the last two patches there, it's like that, the same distance over on the other side. So it's just not what you see here, right? This is one of the...
So hold on a second. So now where this shot starts is over the hill from where we are. So this is all continues up over the hill as well.
Biggest blocks that we have in this area that I know of, and it's scary.
Say again how big it is?
1,200 and some odd hectares. I don't have the exact figures, but I know it's 1,200 hectares. Some people are saying it's 1,400. I don't know, because of pine beetle. Eradicate the pine beetle. Well, they're eradicating the forest too. At the same time, they're trying to eradicate the pine beetle. But
And failing to eradicate.
that was the excuse for this one. Yeah, it was a diverse forest. You know, you had your larch, you had your spruce, you had your fir, and yeah, and even cedar in places, yeah, in the wet areas.
I just gotta jump in here. I mean, this is the part that's so galling. Like, you know, I know some people are gonna say, "Well, what did you think we were gonna do with the pine? You know, it was dying. We had to cash in. We had to, you know, we needed to get those jobs, or we needed to get that timber off the landscape." You know, okay, fine. But why take all the non-pine? You know, why take all the fir? Why take all the larch? You know, there probably wasn't any cedar on this hillside, but, you know, why take all those healthy trees that could have continued filtering the water and, standing and retaining the soil? And, providing habitat. Like, why not do something a little more selective to take out that pine? No, they went in and they demolished everything. And now, yeah, you reap what you sow.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty massive, eh? Enormous, yes. It's like one guy says, it's Armageddon. One guy says, look at this Armageddon. Yeah, right on.
Armageddon, right on. Yeah. Boy, yeah, massive, massive cut block. Yeah, what do you say to that? I mean, you don't even really tell until you put the drone in the air, and you really see it from the air. You see, just how far it goes. And yeah, anyway, I've got one last segment for you here, one last stop on our trip, and it's going to end with a little bit of an interview, with kind of like a more stand-up interview with Stan at the end of this. One more destination, one more stunning discovery that Stan made. Yeah, moving on to our final segment and our final destination on our journey through the Boundary Watershed. And here we go.
Well, here we are, roughly about 4 kilometers on the West Boundary Forest Service Road, FSR. And we're up on a little spur, high enough to get over the trees so we can see this massive slide, which is probably 1 kilometer long, if not better, and 200 or 300 meters wide. And this happened in 2018 during the flood, and hence all that area that's been scoured right down to bedrock, I guess is going to take 10,000 years to get enough soil there now to grow anything.
Yeah, I mean, this is just... I mean, I thought that first one was big. I mean, I haven't seen a ton of landslides like this, and that first one that we saw, I thought was like, holy shit, this is the biggest landslide I've ever seen. And then we got here, and it's like 3 times the size. And this also happened in 2018, that same flood event, and we're gonna get another look at it right now. And yeah, I just, like, this was absolutely mind-blowing. From the top of the mountain all the way to the bottom of the mountain. And this next shot, you get a better look at the origin of the slide here.
There now to grow anything. It was basically caused, in my opinion.
So you can see up at the top here, there was a logging road right here. They've been logging right at the top of the mountain. Yeah, so this is where this whole thing originated from here. I'll just back up a little bit.
It was basically caused, in my opinion, there is a road cut up on the very top there, and I had my 10-power binoculars on it in 2018, and I'm assuming that there was a culvert there, and that all blew out. So probably the culvert would be down in the tailings down below, near the West Boundary Creek itself. It's just an example of bad practices. I mean, if there's any kind of practice, and you would think after 100 years we didn't have to practice because we would know it all. And I don't want to be a know-it-all, but I got 60 years worth, and what we're doing here is insane. Basically insane.
Amen, brother.
You know, it's the greed factor taking over to the point where nobody wants to listen. I've been running my trucks for 4 years. I've spent, you ask my wife, I spend 5 days a week up in the bush, sometimes 6, for the last 4 years. And because I know these roads. I worked on them all, right? And drove on them all while I was working. So I know these roads and I know where to go to find troubles. And you don't have to go very far to find troubles. They just don't care. If there's going to be a problem, that's, hey, this is going to be a washout here. You guys got to do something about it. They're not there.
I mean, just look at this. Like, so much material, so much water and debris and boulders and trees just came ripping down this hillside. You know, it's been scoured all the way down to bedrock. Well, where does all that stuff go? Where does all that material go? It goes down into Boundary Creek, which is right at the base of this valley, the center of this valley, which all washes right out to the Kettle River. And as Stan talks about, they're now starting to see all kinds of little islands start to form in the river. The river is changing. It's scouring the sides. It's going from side to side because there's so many more trees coming down and gravel and boulders and rocks all washing down with the river. You know, and when you get these big spring freshets, it's changing the river. It's changing the whole river system, and it's literally uprooting people's lives. You know, there's a whole section of Grand Forks, like maybe 100 homes near the river, where all those people have been expropriated. All their properties got bought, I believe, by the city, and the province probably kicked in money as well. But of course, they all got post-flood prices for their homes. So no one's getting what they originally paid for their homes. And now they're having to move, maybe take on another mortgage. You know, it's crazy, you know, and I don't know. It's hard to point a finger at that. This one landslide, you know, was caused by one company because of this mistake, and therefore it affected this person over here. There's so many ways in which the industry tries to sort of distance itself and not take responsibility for this. But it's the cumulative effects, you know? It's all this logging going on, as well as lots of other activities, but predominantly the logging, the clear-cut logging, the shoddy road building, and things like this, you know, washing all that material into the river system and just messing things up.
Nobody home. What's happening in the boundary country is scary. It scared the hell out of me, and because there's nobody looking after it. Like, it's going to fall apart. If you don't look after your vehicle, it's going to fall apart sooner or later, right? And nobody's looking after it. They're just running it into the ground. It was at the first flood, well, the major one. The first flood was 2017. Second flood was 2018. Third flood was in 2020. It's like somebody come along and hit you with a baseball bat in the side of the head. I mean, it's a shock, right? And you go down on your knees. What do? I got no more house. I got a mortgage to pay, and they're tearing down my house. All I got's a piece of land, and they're not letting me build on this land, so I don't have even any land. Yeah, the people in town, the businesses, you know, they're all struggling. Nobody for weeks did not come because they're throwing sandbags and everything else, eh? So nobody came to shop, and they're flooded. All their produce and everything they had on the shelves there was 4 feet of snow, or 4 feet of water. Sorry. 2 reasons why I got involved. Because people like you, being a 32-year-old, being my grandchildren, 24.
I'm 34, but thanks, Stan.
My children, I don't want them to have to go through what I can see is going to happen here. Starting with our rivers, that's where it's starting. And there's going to be mayhem. And that's coming. And trying to lessen the blow of what they're doing now in order to let my loved ones at least have a half-decent life like I did. You have to listen to old-timers like myself. If you can find an old-timer that's been a logger and he knows what's right and he knows what's wrong, stick with him. He'll teach you. You got to do on-the-ground work. You got to know what you're stepping on. You know, just don't be looking at your GPS and hanging ribbons and running like hell with running shoes on. You have to go into the forest and appreciate and enjoy your job. So as far as jobs is concerned, after this, it would take thousands and thousands of hours and thousands of men to start fixing what we had damaged to this point. So as far as work is concerned, you don't have to worry. There'll be lots of work. Maybe not in your field, but there'll be lots of work. And you'll have enough to get by. You'll have enough to feed a family and make a house. If we reduce the AAC enough to keep everybody happy and enough to let the ecosystem try and fix itself with our help, it'll have to be, then we have a chance to have a good life as everybody wants, right?
All right. That's the end of what I've got to show you for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. That was a lot of fun. I really got into the groove of, hanging out in the lower corner here. So I'm going to shut that down now. And chiming in. Let's call it chiming in. Yeah, Stan, what a guy. I had such a great time out driving around with him in the Boundary watershed, in the area around Boundary Creek, which is the watershed for the city of Grand Forks, which has experienced devastating floods, over 3 of the last 4 years, where, you should go back and watch the very first edition, or I guess it was the second edition of the Heartwood Stream Series, but the first interview that I did with Jennifer Houghton. And she has been working with Stan a lot on these issues. She was, just living her life. And 3 of the last 4 years, her house has been flooded. She ended up with 1 to 4 feet of water in her house. 3 of the last 4 years. 2018 was the big one where she ended up with 4 feet of water in her house. Hear that story from her own words. Go to the Heartwood Facebook page. Just go to our video section. And you can check out that interview with Jennifer Houghton. And she tells the story of everything that she's been through. And of course, on this trip, I spent even more time with Jennifer. We did a bunch of filming with her around town, did a really amazing interview. Might play some of that on this streams, on another edition of the Stream Series. I got a question from Ian Graham here. Thanks. Hello, Dan. Can you tell us how to get on your schedule? Well, thank you, Ian, for tuning in. I'm not, my schedule right now is pretty loose. I'd like to do one of these a week. I really, really would. And I get into moments of being in the groove and, where I'll do a number of weeks at a time. And it's always Fridays at 4 o'clock. So Fridays at 4 o'clock, that's when I try and do this. I did sort of drop the ball when I went away on my production trip. And then when I came back, I didn't do it that week. I was exhausted. And then I didn't do it last week. So I just, when you fall off the bike, you got to pick yourself back up again. But that's what this was. I was like, I got to get back on the live stream bike. And so I'm going to try and keep this going, keep the momentum going. Fridays at 4 o'clock is when I do this. Thank you to everyone who chimed in the chat. I'll stay in for a little bit longer. Does anyone have any questions in the chat? We'll do some sort of like a live Q&A type thing. I wish I could, dial Stan in here, but I don't think he spends a lot of time on social media. I don't think he does the Facebook thing. But if you have any questions, I'll stay here for a few more minutes. unless I don't see any. But yeah, what else? I'm trying to think about what the next one of these should be. I think that another one that I'm going to do, because one of the things that I hear a lot is like, oh, you only tell the side of the story that's doom and gloom. Well, you know what? That's fair comment. I will say, though, that you can create a false sense of balance. If I were to do 50-50 doom and gloom versus, 50% happy-go-lucky, positive solution stories, might create the impression that, half of logging is good. And I just, you know what? The examples of good forestry, having looked, they're few and far between. But I take the point to heart, and I do want to tell those stories because they are really important. And if we don't share those positive, uplifting, hopeful stories about solutions and alternatives, then people just get depressed and they're like, oh, well, I don't even know what to do. We need to articulate what those solutions are, and I'm going to be doing that. So I think one of the next one of these that I want to do is share some of my footage, my conversation with Herb Hammond. And Herb Hammond is an ecologist. He's a registered professional forester, but he is also an ecosystem-based conservation planner. And he talks a lot. He just had so much great stuff to say about, what we should be doing and how to do proper ecosystem conservation plans, and where we put, water, quality, quantity, and timing of flow at the center of our decision making. And he's also a huge proponent of Indigenous sovereignty and implementing Indigenous ecological knowledge. He's worked with a lot of First Nations, learning from Indigenous foresters and elders and knowledge keepers. And then he's also been able to work with First Nations to help them, with his expertise, create ecosystem-based conservation plans. A really loving, big-hearted human being who just has, who is an absolute wealth of knowledge about, so-called ecoforestry, aka ecosystem-based conservation planning. And we actually went and visited an operation by CIFCO, which was the Slocan Integral Forestry Cooperative. I'd love to actually interview one of those, one of the people from CIFCO. I'll be looking into that. I'll be doing more interviews. And we walked around and we saw what a selective operation looks like, and he was able to really just kind of point out on the ground what was good about it, and what was working, and some of the principles of what ecosystem-based forestry are. So, I think like taking to heart some of that feedback, not wanting to be all doom and gloom, although also not wanting to shy away from the doom and gloom because there's a lot of it. I will start sharing some of those more solutions-based stories. Another thing that I hear is that I don't showcase enough workers' voices. Well, Stan worked in the industry for decades. So I don't know if anyone's out there feeling like, I need to showcase more worker voices. I hear you, and I'm working on it, and I'm trying. I do have plans to do a trip up to, through the Prince George area. So this trip that I went on went out east through the Okanagan and the Kootenays, and then back again. And then I'm going to do another trip that goes, I'm in Vancouver, that goes up north through, Quesnel, Prince George, up to Mackenzie. And I've been assisted greatly, and I've got the support of the Pulp and Paper Workers Union. Public and Private Workers of Canada. They changed their name. They're the PPWC. They represent sawmill workers and woodworkers and other, people working in that side of the industry. And so we're working on getting interviews set up with workers affected by, the decline of the industry, all the many, many mill closures and the consolidation, that's happening. So that'll be coming down the road. And we will be trying to get those workers' voices more into the conversation here. Keep in mind, this is an ongoing conversation. If I didn't talk about something today, let me know. Send me a message, and maybe we'll do something with it next time, right? This is going to go on and on. This story never ends. This is a life work for me. And I just wanted to end by thanking all of the people who contributed to my GoFundMe campaign. that's still open, so if you never made a donation and you feel like making a donation, honestly, every dollar counts, and I'll post that link in the comments. That's about all I've got for you today. I'm going to quit rambling and I'm going to let you go about your evening. Happy Friday. Have a great weekend. And may the forest be with you.